Students of African History at LCSC. Professor Eric Martin. Some of y'all who've had me for other classes have mentioned that one of the things you miss in this class is starting out every class with a breathing exercise. You guys know you can do those without me, right? I'm going to really suggest that if you're missing that, just make it a habit when you log in. Take 10 breaths, 3 breaths, 1 breath. Orient your head. All right. Welcome to week 9. Can you believe it? Week 9. This might be a little longer than I intended. I try to keep these at 20 minutes. I'm still going to try to keep this at 20 minutes, but we'll see. There's a lot to cover today. I want to talk a little bit about your midterm grades. I want to talk a little bit about what we've done the last couple of weeks in terms of the Atlantic slave trade. I want to talk about the twist on things that we're doing this week that I've already talked about in the week 7 video, but I'm going to bring it up again. And then I just kind of want to lay things out for what we're doing from this point forward. This is the let's make sure we're all on track with what we think we're doing video. So let's start out with a few announcements midterm wise. I submitted y'all's midterm grades. I don't know when Warrior Web releases those midterm grades, but I submitted your midterm grades. I also made a posting about it on Canvas. Your Canvas looks a little different than mine. I'm going to show you my secret one without the student view because I want to switch back and forth between some tabs. But the deal is this. Canvas cannot tell you what your overall grade is in this class. Even when last night I was in Canvas messing with a few of the formulas to try to make Canvas match more what's going on the syllabus. I got an email from a couple of y'all, worried that how did my grade go from a B to a D or wherever it went. It didn't. Canvas can't tell you any of that. So check out the announcement in terms of how to figure that stuff out. You don't need pinpoint accuracy to have an idea about where you're at in this class, all right? But I submitted midterm grades to Warrior Web. Those aren't necessarily pinpoint, okay? Maybe I gave you a B minus for your midterm grade. Maybe it's really a C plus. Maybe it's really a B. But we're in the ballpark. You know where you need to be doing, right? The point is there's room for improvement. You got a D, there's room for improvement. If it was an A, doing everything right? If it was up to me, it would just be pass fails for the upper division courses, but that's the way it is. All right, midterm grades. The last couple of weeks, we've been discussing the Atlantic slave trade stuff. And in general, I'm pretty happy with the way that some of that discussion has gone. And I say in general for a couple of reasons, but I'll just kind of talk for a minute here. Actually, I want to pause this and come back. All right, so the first discussion over chapter 1 on the Atlantic slave trade, looking at this issue about why Africans were enslaved. Really happy with what you guys did with that, right? Because the whole issue was to get into was it primarily racially oriented or primarily economic oriented. And of course, there's some of each. And in some cases, folks make stronger arguments for one or the other. But I think that's a really great debate for you guys to see how historians try to deal with cause and effect, and that it's not necessarily as resolved as maybe some folks think it is. And that doesn't mean that there's not evidence. That doesn't mean that there's not, some points of view that are stronger than others. It just means that sometimes we are not used to thinking about history as you get to a certain point and then there's unresolved issues, right? So, and maybe, further study resolves them. Maybe we have to live with some ambiguity. So you guys did a really great job on that, and particularly thinking about how your grand conclusions on that. And then that moved us into the chapter looking at the slave trade within Africa and getting a sense about what's happening internally in Africa, because there's a slave trade, right, within Africa before Europeans ever show up. So getting an idea about what that looked like, but then also getting an idea about how it changes once Europeans arrive and what the cause and effect is on that front, right? And then again, you have some folks making arguments, stronger arguments, weaker arguments, however it is, in terms of whether the increased demand is being driven by, or not increased demand, but the way that the slave trade itself is changing is coming from internal African forces or forces externally to Africa. And that's a big deal. You've got your two different variables that you're trying to play with and figure out which one is the predominant one. Maybe there's not a predominant one. But then you get these different points of view, right, in terms of how all this works out. And a lot of y'all did a really good job, again, messing with the grand conclusions, trying to, come up with the guns for slaves, arguments, how strong they are, that kind of thing. Same kind of deal on the middle passage. And one of the things with the middle passage, I think a lot of times this is sort of maybe where people's investigation of the Atlantic slave trade starts. But then we have this middle passage, and one of the things I like about the way this book sets it up is it doesn't begin there. It kind of sets everything up before we get here. And then we get to the issue, particularly the Phil Curtin document, right? Where he's going through the issue about, well, how do you figure out the numbers? That's a nice historical problem to play with. So again, the whole point of the chapter is to illustrate how historians go about tackling problems and different points of view on the problems and how they're trying to figure these kinds of things out, right? So sort of the how do we know? And then finally, the last chapter, frankly, I could have dealt with a few more grand conclusions on this one. Those of y'all who wrote something, for the most part, was fine, but I could have dealt with a little more detail. Because the effects on Africa stuff, the Rodney piece is classic, the Manning piece is classic, the Thornton piece is classic, where they're all trying to really examine sort of this idea, for lack of a better way to put it, as, how much participation, willing participation, do we have on the parts of Africans, and then what does that mean in terms of the analysis of the slave trade? Now let me back up. Those of y'all who wrote stuff, there's some pretty good stuff on here, right? So it's nice, again, to see the contrasting points of view and the folks who are trying to merge it together. And I totally get it that some of the stuff was, confusing in terms of the emergent Africa and the I can't say the next word, engagee. But again, I think you guys did a really good job of seeing it's external pressure versus internal pressure. What's happening? Okay. This is a drawn out way of saying, more or less, I'm happy with these last few discussions. I'd like to see more detail. When I say I'm happy with the last few discussions, you guys know what I'm talking about. You know, I look at some of these discussion posts that are full of detail, good paragraphs, couple of paragraphs maybe, going into some of the various elements of the document, connecting it to other documents. It conveys to me that you read the material and that you thought about material. That's what I care about. I read a few of the other posts and it's sort of like, nice job, this is a fascinating topic. All right. So, let's talk about this week. This week, we're finishing up the book, but the setup is a little bit different, and I've gotten a couple of questions about it. But I'll review it, but also in the week 7 video, not this kind of video given the announcements, but the videos where inside the modules where I'm saying this is how to do it. In the video in week 7, at the 18.5-minute point, I talk a little bit about how I want you guys to do this, but I'm happy to cover it again. Here's the deal. No, I didn't forget to put your names on here. Maybe I should have, just to prevent any confusion. But I thought after assigning documents for the first 2 weeks of discussion, this week I'm just gonna leave it to the group to make sure all the documents get discussed. You still got to work with the same deadlines. You're still working with the same people in your last name group. However, if you're the very first person to post something, pick a document. If you're not the very first person to post something, then pick a document that hasn't been covered, or go into additional detail if you think somebody missed something. However, the mission for the entire group is to make sure all those documents get discussed individually and then in the grand conclusions, right? Okay. I have complete and total faith in you that you can do that. That gets us to next week. We go back to some Basil Davidson. Okay, so we'll go back to Basil Davidson. Discussion leaders. Last name begins with the letters E through P. Everybody can participate. Those folks are required to make the discussion happen by the deadlines. That is going to get us to spring break. And I've got a few things I need to do before we're ready for this. That's why you're looking at the syllabus. The module stuff isn't quite right. I'm hoping to get up through the African Perspectives on Colonialism book, the analysis. I'm hoping to get that squared away by the end of today, and then over spring break finish us out. But this is more or less what we're doing. When we come back from spring break, we are dealing with this very thin but jam-packed book. Okay? We've got 4 chapters on it. We're going to deal with 2 chapters per week. I haven't figured out exactly how that discussion's going to happen yet. Based on what I've seen, I'm kind of thinking I'm going to assign your name to a chapter and you guys are going to help break it down. I don't know. But the big grade is going to be over your analysis, which is due that week of April the 15th, right? That's where you're moving towards, is the book review over the material. So we're talking about this stuff the week of April 1st and the week of April 8th to get you prepped to write that book analysis. Okay? So expect something along the lines of what we're doing with the African slave trade discussion. Try to get that figured out today for the 2 weeks after spring break with a book analysis. Then back to Basil Davidson. Then, excuse me, a book analysis about nervous conditions. I'm going to put up a discussion post in here somewhere about this, okay? I'll figure that out during spring break. It's a novel. It's a fun read. Kind of saving it to the end. It's a day's worth of discussion if this was a face-to-face class. More Basil Davidson. And then here comes the end of the term essay. I've talked about that in a few different places. You should go take a look if you haven't already. Wow. Did I really get this done in like under 20 minutes? I'm impressed. Maybe I'm not impressed. Maybe I'm more surprised. So, that's kind of where we're at. We're at the midterm. We're starting to move into the next phase of class. Those of y'all who are doing well, you've kind of set your patterns. I think you know what's up. I get a couple of y'all who pop into my virtual office hours just to make sure you're on the right path. It's very smart. It's time to start thinking about your final papers. You got an additional reading for that final paper. So it's time to start figuring out what that's going to be. And I'm going to get to work sorting out the rest of the semester. If you have any questions, send me a message through the Canvas inbox. I'm online all the time. Pop into my office hours. Send me a message through the Canvas inbox saying you can't make those office hours, and we'll figure out another time to meet. Drop by my office. One of y'all dropped by the office the other day. It was really cool to meet you. Some of y'all I know from other classes, other y'all I've never met before. It's cool, and it makes it a little easier to have discussions if you start having issues. So anyway, good luck and enjoy your historical studies.